2016 was a pretty important year for me as far as my anime viewing went, as it was the first time I started watching anime as it came out. Now that we're well into 2017, I've had a lot of time to catch up with shows I may have missed, and it's time to take a look at 5 of my favourite shows of the year. And no, JoJo won't be on this list. You lot already know how much I love Part 4, so it's about time I gave the spotlight to some other anime. Enjoy! Another reason this was a pretty monumental year for me is because I watched my first Gundam show, and I was not disappointed. Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt has a plot that can basically be boiled down to 2 factions are at war, and that's all you need to know. No prior knowledge of the Gundam universe is needed, as this show isn't one for plot dumps and lengthy sessions of dialogue, instead taking advantage of its medium by leaving a lot of the viewer's assertions to what they see in the battlefield. Thunderbolt strives to show just how sickening war can be, and through its imagery portrayed in its fights it gives us a new outlook on the devastation conflict has for all sides. It's not the first show to do it, and it won't be the last, but I found it to be one of the most impactful. The anime is also accompanied by one of the most meaningful soundtracks any show has ever had, which is where a lot of the appeal comes from for me. Thunderbolt utilises the genre of free jazz, which is a very loose way of playing as it seems to float between many other subgenres. It's used to great effect to convey the tone of the moment, and always manages to draw you into the scene you're watching with how well it accompanies its visuals. It's a roller coaster ride of emotions, and absolutely worth watching if you're interested in seeing the darker side of war. Thunderbolt didn't receive too much praise when airing, as its erratic schedule meant that a lot of people missed it. On the other hand, while I've heard lots of good things about Mob Psycho 100, it seems that many people missed out on that show, which really baffles me. Mob Psycho 100 is created by the mangaka known as One, famous for his One Punch Man series, which may have been the biggest Western anime in a decade. Despite this though, a lot of people were turned off by his other work's unique art style, and if you're one of these people, please reconsider. The story follows Shigeo Kageyama, an insanely overpowered esper trying to balance his school life with his part-time job at the Spirits and Such consultation office. While it may seem from the premise that it could devolve into a one-dimensional character doing the same thing over and over, the story stays fresh due to how well written the main character is. While Saitama wanted to enjoy fighting, Shigeo doesn't really care about his powers and has a lot of conflict regarding many other aspects of his life. This almost works as a coming-of-age story, and the main character is incredibly relatable to the viewer despite how wacky the show may seem at first. It has a surprising amount of depth with its cast of characters, and if you're looking for something that expands on the One Punch Man formula a bit, I wholeheartedly recommend trying this show out. That said though, if you are a huge action buff, the show's art style complements the over-the-top fighting many of the battles have perfectly, and the entire thing is a marvel to look at. Studio Bones is one of my favourite animation companies due to the fluidity they have in their shows, and this is one of their finest. The next choice is a pretty divisive one, Grimoire of Fantasy and Ash. It's one of those stuck in a fantasy world shows which I normally despise, but this one has a twist on it that I haven't really seen before. As you'd expect, when you're teleported into another world it's a scary time, and the majority of the show hones in on this time frame as we see the cast adapt to their surroundings. Because of this, it adds a sense of realism to it as well as some dramatic scenes. It's slow paced, but when something does happen it normally has a huge emotional impact on the cast, and I found that Grimoire did an excellent job of making realistic characters due to how much they changed due to the events happening to them. While the show can be quite heavy at times, it manages to be relaxing outside of these scenes due to its piano and acoustic soundtrack accompanied by a gorgeous watercolour aesthetic on the backgrounds. It gives the entire thing a hazy, almost dreamlike feel to it, which certainly fits the perspective of the characters who have no idea why they're here. As you'd expect, how they got to this world isn't a pressing issue for the beginning of this kind of show, but it adds just enough intrigue with the characters losing their memory to keep you invested in seeing the end result, whenever that may be. The show isn't perfect, however. The pacing will turn many off, and despite trying to be different, it does rely on tropes at times. That said, if you're not a fan of anime like Sword Art Online and Log Horizon, this may be worth a shot. Ever since watching Baccano, I've always wanted another Mafia anime, and I'm glad to say that 91 Days delivers. At its core, the show is a revenge story as a teenager tries to make headway into the criminal underworld, and does a good job of immersing us as the main character gets introduced to the different families and jobs expected of him. As you'd expect, the show is chock full of betrayals, and it's honestly refreshing to see this kind of setting and standard Mafia show done well in anime. Due to the ever unpredictable psyche of the main character, I was always excited to see where the show would go next, and the moral conflict that introduces itself as the story develops gives a thought-provoking side to it. As we see things from the antagonist's perspective, the idea of what's right in this situation becomes less obvious, and as a result I come to respect both parties involved, being more invested in seeing the end result. The show is very well paced and manages to have some of the finest cliffhangers I've seen in quite a while. Without a doubt you'll be at the edge of your seat the entire time you watch it. The final show is a bit of a weird one, Bungo Stray Dogs Season 2. The basic way to describe this show is that the main character, Nakajima Atsushi, is kicked out of his orphanage, getting hired by a company with a lot of weird and wacky characters. They all have powers named after famous writers, kind of like the musical namesakes in JoJo. The first season is good, but it has some glaring flaws in my eyes. It forces comedy into its scenes with a jarring chibi art style at horrible times, taking me out of the overall moment. Many of the characters also didn't get enough development throughout its 12 episodes, making some cast members seem fairly one-dimensional. That said though, it had some pretty interesting powers which led to some great fights, and I enjoyed the dynamic between the cast even if it got a bit repetitive. The second season improved on the first in basically every way, fleshing out much of the characters and introducing a new set of villains, resulting in some interesting matchups as all three factions in the show fight against each other. It even toned down in the out-of-place comedy, giving the show a far more serious tone which fits it well. And there you have it. 2016 was a damn good year, and here's hoping that 2017 is even better. Thanks for watching folks, I'll see you next time.